5 minutes later. The next day, Mark had little to do except teach his classes for the regular guards. They were also going to bury Joe late that afternoon, so he checked on the arrangements for the funeral a couple of times. With nothing else pressing, he had plenty of free time to observe Gunny's class. In the morning, the trainer had the 5 women running with packs and rifles just like his group had done. Mark noticed that all of the women were having at least a little trouble, but none of them said a word. He figured that Susan had given them all a pep talk before the class started. Jess was the oldest in the group, and she was struggling more than the others. When she cast a look in Mark's direction, he just shrugged his shoulders to let her know that there was nothing he could do. The look on her face hardened with determination. Mark had really been hoping she would quit, but he couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Gunny was just getting warmed up, and it would be a long day for the woman he loved. The group Susan had assembled impressed Mark. In addition to herself and Jess, she had Olga Jensen, Paul's wife. Olga was a big-boned, tall, blonde woman in her early 30s. She reminded Mark of a Viking. She was almost 6 feet tall, and while you couldn't call her fat, she was no lightweight. The youngest member of the group, Christina Green, or Chris as she liked to be called, was the daughter of John and Laura. She was 19 or 20 and had been about to start her sophomore year at UTSA when the burst hit. She had gone to school in Lavernia and had lettered in almost every sport. She wasn't drop-dead gorgeous, but she was cute. With her tomboy attitude and athletic physique, she was one of the most pursued young females in the area. The last and most surprising member on Susan's team was Manny's daughter, Letty. Although she was the smallest female, she was by far the fastest. Mark figured she must be a runner because she was having the least trouble. If it weren't for the pack and rifle, Mark deduced that she'd be flying up and down Gunny's obstacle course. Mark watched what Gunny was doing. The man was a master. Mark hadn't been able to see what he was trying to do when he'd been in the middle of it yesterday. But Gunny had a method to his madness. It was all so clear to Mark. Now that he was sitting on the sidelines, Gunny ran the women until they were tired enough that it began to interfere with their cognitive ability. Then he started instructing them to do this or that, knowing they'd have a difficult time following instructions. Then, when someone messed up, he scolded them in a manner not to correct them, but in a way that would make them angry. Mark realized that this would let Gunny evaluate how they would most likely perform in the field when exhaustion and fear took over. Fear was a hard emotion to invoke without danger present, but anger could be a close substitute. Although the women were making mistakes, Mark noticed they were doing better than his group had yesterday. They seemed to have more focus. This observation dovetailed into what he'd seen in his karate class over the years. Females were much better students than men. After lunch, Gunny had the women sitting in chairs as he lectured about small unit tactics, escape and evasion, and reconnoitering. When he was through with his lecture, he quickly began the next phase. Okay? I want you all to grab your packs and rifles and run down to the gate and back as fast as you can. The women groaned as they stood up and tried to stretch out their stiff muscles. They slowly started reaching for their gear. Gunny watched for a second. When none of the women were looking, he had a smirk on his face that, had any of the day's victims seen it, would have ruined his plan. Mark saw it from his distant spectator seat and couldn't help but laugh inside. "Move!" Gunny screamed, his face now deadly serious. The women jumped at his command and quickly began to run toward the gate, hoisting their packs into place as they ran. Mark watched as the individuals made it to the gate and back as quickly as they could, which wasn't that fast. Letty came back first, and Jess brought up the rear, huffing and puffing. When she reached the rest of the group, Gunny opened up on them with a barrage. He censored what he said to them a little compared to the language he had used with the men, but only slightly. "Do you all have shit in your ears, or are you just stupid?" he yelled. "We just spent several hours working on moving as a unit and covering each other, and you all act like you're in a sack race at the company picnic. Just run off and leave the others behind. I've seen kindergartners who rode the short bus do better than you 5 wannabes. Now do it again." 3 women took off down the hill with 2 covering them. When the 3 had gone 25 or 30 yards, they knelt down and covered the 2 as they ran past the first group of ways. Then the process repeated itself until they'd made it to the gate and all the way back. "That was slightly better, but you're still slower than a 3-legged turtle. Do it again." "But Gunny," Susan gasped. her hands on her knees trying to catch her breath. Instantly, Gunny was screaming in her face, his nose was just inches from hers. "But, Gunny, what? When I tell you to do something, Missy, you don't. But, Gunny me, you just damn well do it. You got that?" Susan's eyes were the size of manhole covers when Gunny jumped in her face. But upon the expulsion of the word Missy, they narrowed to angry slits and that Mark didn't know how she could see out of. She grabbed Jess by the shirt sleeve and they started down the hill. Mark watched as Gunny ran them up and down the hill 3 more times. Then he took them to the puddle. He explained the drill and had them get into push-up position. Mark noticed that he'd let them take their packs off. "Up, down, up, down, up, down, up," he barked. Letty was the first to fall to the ground. Although she was the fastest runner, it seemed she had the least upper body strength. Gunny pounced on her like a spider on a fly. "I told you I only wanted to see your hands and your toes touching the ground. Did I not make myself clear? Or maybe you can't cut it. I guess I could let you do girly push-ups. Is that what you want? You want to do girl push-ups?" Gunny's tone was venomous. "No, Gunny, I can do them," Letty said as she struggled back into the up position. "Down!" All the faces went into the water. "You don't need this shit, Letty." Gunny's tone changed as he seemingly reasoned with the woman. "You got a little boy who needs you. Have you thought about that? A little boy who doesn't have a father anymore? What's he going to do if something happens to you? Up! Just get your stuff and go home. You don't want to do this." "Yes, I do," Letty yelled back at the old man. "I have to do it for my boy, so he can see that men and women can do anything, if they stick to it." Mark couldn't tell if the water was dripping off her face was from the puddle or from tears. "Down, up, down, up." Susan was the next to drop. Gunny seemed to really enjoy going after her. "You're supposed to be the leader of these Girl Scouts?" he screamed at her. "Why don't you get a real Girl Scout troop and take them out to sell some cookies, Missy? Down! Come on, Susan. You need to go home and take care of your boys. They need you. Letty's son has his grandparents if someone happens to her. What about your boys? They don't have anyone but you. Quit this silly charade and go home to them," he pleaded. "Up!" Susan stared hatefully at the Marine when her face came out of the water. "Stick it," was all she said through clenched teeth. Olga and Chris eventually fell and then withstood Gunny's debasing discourse and feigned sympathy. Both passed the test. Jess was the last one to fall. Mark was surprised she'd made it the longest. In fact, he was beginning to believe she'd be successful. Gunny moved to her side. Mark cringed at what was coming. He knew Gunny would push every button until he could find the one that would get her to quit. He'd failed to get a quitter yet, and he wouldn't be happy until he had one. He would be relentless. Until a few minutes ago, Mark had been hoping that Gunny would get his wife to resign. But somehow, he now wanted Jess to be successful. He held his breath as Gunny verbally attacked. "Get back up, right now," he yelled, as she pushed herself back up. Then his tone softened. "What's your story, Teach? You've been lagging behind all day. You can't stay with these young girls. I hear you're one hell of a teacher. Why don't you go back and do what you're good at?" "Down!" Mark saw Gunny get close to Jess and whisper in her ear as her face was in the water. He couldn't make out what the old devil dog was saying. Mark found himself whispering a prayer for Jess. "Up!" Jess and the other women pushed themselves up out of the puddle. Mark saw the look on his wife's face. It was as if she was in pain, more than would be caused by the physical stress of the push-ups. Mark could see her bottom lip quivering. His shoulders slumped as he realized what was happening. Gunny had won. She was going to quit, just like she had quit karate, aerobics, jogging, and countless other things. "Down!" 4 of the women stuck their faces back into the water, but Jess was frozen in the up position. Tears were streaming down her face. Gunny had broken her. "I should have helped her last night," Mark thought guiltily. Now he'd have to build her back up, and it wouldn't be easy. He cursed himself for agreeing with Susan about a women's team. His life would be hell until Jess got her self-confidence back. Gunny continued his pleading. "Come on, Teach. You don't need some old fart like me to tell you what you can't do. You know you're in over your head. Save yourself the embarrassment and just get up and go home. Up!" Mark knew her. She would silently stand up and walk home as Gunny had suggested. His emotions and thoughts were as jumbled as he knew hers were at this moment. He found himself holding his breath. "Down!" Mark was a little surprised when Jess's arms bent and her face went into the water. "Jess, you don't need this crap." Gunny really did sound sincere. "The neighborhood needs you to teach their kids. That's your calling. What are you trying to prove? Just go home, take a hot bath. Trust me, you'll thank me tomorrow. Up! Jess pushed back up. Her face was screwed up like someone was twisting it from the inside. Here's where she stands up and leaves, Mark thought. Fuck you, Gunny, she screamed. Mark was shocked. The other 4 women whooped and laughed at her outburst. It seemed somehow to unite them. It became their mantra. They repeated it over and over, quietly at first, but slightly louder each time. I am good enough. I may have to work twice as hard, but I will, Jess snarled at the old man. After staring him down for a minute, she joined in a chorus of, Fuck you, Gunny. Mark was dumbfounded. Jess wasn't quitting. She had made it. Somehow Gunny had pulled something out of her he'd been unable to find in over 20 years. The 5 women had fused into a cohesive unit before his eyes. Mark now wondered how Gunny would react to the unified response he was receiving from his team. He didn't have to wait long for an answer. Okay, get your gear. Class is dismissed for the day. Be back here at 08:30 in the morning. The women sprang up and all high-fived and hugged each other. They grabbed their gear as a team and started walking out of the field. Ladies, Gunny called. The women turned around to face the old man. I'm only going to say this once, so listen good. Gunny cleared his throat. I was wrong.